with the
And with me on the program from Sydney this morning, Labor frontbencher Senator Matt Thistlethwaite, and in Melbourne, Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. It's good to see you both. First time after the election. Congrats on holding your seats. First, Kelly, to you on this. It's pretty clear that what the Indonesians think, we don't really need to hear from the ambassador, do we, to get a sense. There are real concerns that Mr Abbott's going to have to manage when he visits Jakarta next week.
Well, it's quite appropriate, Kieran, that we take all briefings from our senior officials on these and other matters. That is the normal course of business of being in government, and we are going about the course of being in business, in government, in a very methodical and organised and very predictable way. We're not going to engage in megaphone diplomacy. It's appropriate that we have discussions face to face and with the relevant people, but let me say this, we have clearly articulated our policy going into the last election. We have had a very long-standing constructive relationship with Indonesia. That is not going to change, and we will be able to together work through these and any other issues that might arise.
There are certainly issues, though. There are differences of opinion, aren't there? When you hear that MP's comments overnight, and from the Foreign Minister himself, as much as you say that you're pushing ahead, and Julie Bishop said this on this program earlier in the week, that you're not seeking permission from the Indonesians but understanding, there doesn't seem to be a lot of understanding at the moment, does there?
Well, as I said to you, Kieran, we will continue to engage, as you would expect us to engage, directly with Indonesian officials. We've been very clear about our policy. We know that there is a big issue that we need to solve, our border protection issue. That is something that the Australian people are more than aware of, with more than 50,000 people arriving unauthorised by boat because of the dismantling of the border protection measures that were put in place by the previous Rudd government. So there is a big issue that we need to solve here. We have articulated how we are going to do that, and we will do that very constructively with our neighbours.
And they're obviously taking it seriously, Matt Thistlethwaite, in terms of bringing the Australian ambassador back. He's obviously as attuned to the Indonesian thinking on this as anyone. And Tony Abbott's moving on this very quick, smart. So he's been true to his word.
Well, the comments of the Indonesian politician that you played earlier, Kieran, aren't rogue comments. That's the reflection of the position of the Indonesian government. And this is quickly turning into a diplomatic disaster for the new government. And it's nothing new. The writing's been on the wall on this issue for many, many months now. The Indonesian ambassador said some months ago that the Indonesian government would not countenance turning back the boats. Recently, Marty Natalegawa, the Indonesian foreign minister, has said that Indonesia will not accept a policy of buying back the boats. What's important to get an outcome in this area is international cooperation, and at the moment the government doesn't have that from Indonesia, and it doesn't look like getting it.
But it's a bit much to say it's a foreign policy disaster, isn't it, Senator Thistlethwaite? Well, not Senator, I should say. Sorry, you know, in the House of Representatives. My apologies. I should correct myself as the member for Kingsford Smith now. Yeah, the Prime Minister's heading to Jakarta next week to do just that, isn't he? To try and smooth over these differences. It's hardly a disaster.
Well, it is in this respect that for at least 6 to 12 months now, the Indonesian government have been saying to the opposition that this sort of policy approach is unacceptable. Yet, when in opposition, they pushed ahead with it. And now in government, you've had, over the last week, 2 senior members of the Indonesian government say, look, we're not going to accept this. You've got to do some work on changing your policy. But Tony Abbott's still pushing ahead on this issue. I think that's really an affront.
You're going to have disagreements. There will be disagreements, won't there, in foreign policy? You've had some experience in it yourself as Parliamentary Secretary. You know that countries don't always agree, but you've got to have your own sovereign policy, don't you?
Yes, of course. But the way to do that and the way to approach it is through discussions, not a game of tennis in the media, which is currently what we've got. Indonesia saying one thing, Tony Abbott refusing to accept it, lobbing the ball back into their court again on a particular issue. That's unacceptable, and that's not going to, more importantly, that's not going to get us an outcome. And what we need to see here is some form of cooperation. We haven't got that yet, and it's not likely that we're going to get it.
I want to move on to the swearing in and then subsequently the news that we received very shortly after the new government was sworn in yesterday, Kelly O'Dwyer, that some top public servants would be gone. Don Russell, Blair Comley, and also Andrew Metcalfe, and also the Treasury Secretary Martin Parkinson as of halfway through next year. He's going to be wrapping up. Now, in terms of the first three that I mentioned there, is this retribution for their involvement in formulating a couple of controversial Labor policies like the carbon price, like their border protection policy? Is that what we're seeing here?
Absolutely not. There is no suggestion that has happened, and any suggestion that Labor might like to run by a spin in the media is completely and utterly false. It is quite appropriate for an incoming government that has just been sworn in with a terrific ministry, might I say. It is quite appropriate that we put in place the right people to head up those departments. There is nothing new in that. That has happened for every single incoming government since time immemorial.
Okay, Matt Thistlethwaite, your response to that? Because surely an incoming government's allowed to restructure departments, and with that some people will have to be moved on. Isn't that the reality?
But these are very experienced and effective public servants. Andrew Metcalfe. Andrew's been described as a first-class public servant by the former Immigration Minister, Amanda Vanstone. Blair Comley set up the architecture for what is worldly recognised as one of the best carbon price schemes in the world. But the important point here, Kieran, really is that this is just the warm-up act. This is the lemon next to the pie, really. This is the warm-up to cuts to services that we're going to see later on. And you're going to see this Commission of Audit, typical Liberal Party style. They come to government, they do a Commission of Audit, and then they go about cutting services. And this week we've seen in Queensland that the Education Minister there announced that they're closing 6 schools in Queensland. Now, you've got a growing population in Queensland, yet they're closing 6 schools. In my community, in the seat of Kingsford Smith, the Liberal government here cut $30 million from our local hospital and closed 37 beds. This is just the warm-up act for the main event, which is going to be cuts to services later on.
There were some moves on department structures, the machinery of government, Kelly O'Dwyer. Some, like aid, for example, AusAid brought into the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Tim Costello, who I'll be speaking to after 9 a.m, has expressed concerns. He says he doesn't want to risk confusing what diplomatic goals with aid goals and trying to combat poverty. Do you accept those concerns, Kelly?
Well, with the greatest respect to Tim Costello, I don't. And let me say this. In 2010, it was separated. AusAid was separated from the Department of Foreign Affairs. So this is a fairly new thing. We are simply restoring the right structure and the right balance to the department to ensure that there isn't duplication, that there is a very clear focus, and that foreign aid, where it's delivered, is delivered appropriately and it's delivered effectively. You know, the one concern I have with some of the foreign aid that has been delivered in the past has been that it hasn't always gone on the ground to the people who are most deserving of it. And that is the real focus in foreign aid. Instead, we have seen some foreign aid go to advocacy groups, people who are being paid to advocate for more foreign aid. Now, I'm not sure that that is an effective use of our foreign aid dollar.
Are you worried, though, that there is a risk here, like Reverend Costello says, that by trying to align your diplomatic and aid goals, that you confuse the message a bit, and rather than try and combat poverty, which is, I suppose, that the first and primary purpose of aid, that you're then diminishing that by making it part of your diplomatic goals?
Well, as I said to you, this has always been the focus, to have foreign aid under the Department of Foreign Affairs. It's only in recent times that it's actually been separated in 2010. So there's nothing really new in all of this, as much as everybody might like to, to try and suggest otherwise. We want to make sure that there isn't duplication, that there isn't waste, and that there isn't inefficiency. And I think it's entirely appropriate that it is brought under the umbrella of foreign affairs, as it should be and as it always should have been. And
this is only, Matt Thistlethwaite, something that Kelly O'Dwyer says is a new thing. It was only separated in 2010, and the point is that critics of the aid budget say the structure hasn't been able to keep up with the spend. So that has been something that several critics have pointed to the aid budget, saying that it's been growing so strongly in recent years, but the agency hasn't been able to manage it effectively.
Well, I don't accept that criticism, Kieran. Kelly's wrong when she says that the aid dollar is being spread too thinly and not being effective. When Labor came to government in 2007, the first thing that we did in this foreign portfolio was to review Australia's aid commitment and whether or not that budget was effective. And we actually pared back some of the breadth of the aid expenditure to focus on a number of important policy areas, in particular education and saving lives. And that's the focus of our aid budget. And I'll give you an example. I travelled to Papua New Guinea some months ago to open a tuberculosis clinic in the western province of Daru. Now that firmly focused on saving lives. Pacific Women Shaping Pacific Development is a program specifically aimed at reducing the horrific levels of domestic violence that women in the Pacific face.
But there's nothing to say that this new structure is going to preclude good initiatives like that from continuing.
But the point that Kelly makes, that the aid budget being spread too thinly and not delivering results on the ground, is simply not true. And that's the excuse and the reason that's being used by the new government to make these reforms, when in actual fact it's not true on the ground. And very much the aid budget has been focused on delivering better education results, transport infrastructure, law and justice, and better health outcomes. They're the four policy priorities that all of our aid is aimed at, and I don't believe that the Australian people would see those as spread too thinly and not adequately focused.
Let's take a quick break on AM Agenda. Oh yeah, sure. Before we go to a break, Kelly, just a quick response, sure.
Sure. All I was going to simply say is that the review of aid effectiveness was something that was our policy, which the government adopted, and we were very pleased about that going into the 2010 election. They didn't adopt, though, all of the recommendations of that review, which is something that we have said that we will do in government. And it's about making sure there isn't waste and mismanagement within the aid budget, and it's making sure that bureaucracy is not getting all of the aid dollar, but in fact the money is going on the ground. And that's simply all we're talking about here.
I'll have more on that with Tim Costello, the World Vision Chief, after 9 a.m. though. A quick break on AM Agenda. I'll be back with Kelly O'Dwyer and Matt Thistlethwaite.
You should know. I say it once, twice, I say it nice and slow, yeah. Hey, now listen up and listen real close, baby. It's the words in my mouth that matter the most. I won't.
With new bars, restaurants and entertainment, there's something new for every one of you at Crown.
Samsonite's extensive range of business cases, backpacks and mobile offices are designed for all business needs. High quality material and details combine style and functionality. Samsonite Business, the perfect business partner.
I wonder when you'll taste a tale from Wonka's pen. If you want to see some more, then listen here. Just have a little word in Wonka's ear. New Wonka chocolate.
Out here, success is measured in fractions of a second. So pushing the limit requires a good foundation. Which is why our racing cars are based on our most dynamic sedan, the Volvo S60. Come and drive the S60 to see why we're taking V8 supercar racing.
finding something for everyone to love. It's just one of the lengths we go to make you feel at home.
This is AM Agenda. Thanks for your company with me this morning. Labor frontbencher Matt Thistlethwaite and Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer. Kelly O'Dwyer, to you on the Liberal ministry, the coalition ministry, the first Abbott government. One woman in cabinet, Wyatt Roy, your Liberal colleague, has written in The Australian that that's not good enough this morning. You weren't even promoted to the ranks of parliamentary secretary. You must be disappointed. Were you surprised by that?
Well, first let me say that everybody who was promoted in the new ministry was well deserving of their promotions, and I congratulate them on their promotions. It is a very fine ministry, and Tony Abbott has got a very, very strong team in place. So we have got a strong team, a very strong talent pool in the Liberal Party and in the National Party, and that, I suppose, distinguishes us quite distinctly from our Labor Party opponents. We have a deep talent pool, and that will stand us in good stead in times to come.
I know many people will be wanting to hear, though, what you think about the general argument about the lack of women in the cabinet. What have you made of that argument? Does Tony Abbott need to make this a priority, given, well, you've been in opposition for 6 years? Shouldn't more have been done to try and promote people and get them ready for that sort of level of government?
Well, look, he's got a very, very fine ministry, a very strong ministry. He's got a very strong team, and we are going about the business of government, and that is a very deliberate and methodical business. So, you can't complain when you have a strong team in place.
But you, on the fact that there's only one woman in cabinet, we've heard Sue Boyce, we've heard Judith Troth, former and current Liberals, critical of the lack of female representation. Your thoughts on that specifically?
I'm not going to run a commentary on a decision that is appropriately the decision of the Prime Minister. As I said to you, I believe it's an incredibly strong team. It's a very strong ministry, and we are all together as the broader team that has been elected to the Parliament going to work incredibly hard to keep the faith with the Australian people who have placed their trust in us to rebuild the country.
Are you personally disappointed?
Well, look, I think every single person who goes into parliamentary life believes that they can make a contribution, and whether that's on the Liberal side, the National side, the Labor side, everybody believes that they have a contribution to make, and everybody would like more responsibility. I don't think there's any great news in any of that.
That's the reality, isn't it, Matt Thistlethwaite? A talented young MP like Kelly O'Dwyer is ambitious like anyone else, and that's just the nature of politics, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is in some respects, Kieran, but look, I have to say that I think Wyatt Roy, Judith Troth, Sue Boyce are right on this issue. There's simply not enough women in the first Abbott cabinet, and it doesn't reflect the views and modern aspirations of Australia. And there's some very capable women within the Liberal Party who've held senior positions in broader Australian society. There's women who have been former partners in law firms, CEOs of companies. Kelly held a very senior position within the former Treasurer's office. Very capable of being in the cabinet, yet they're not. And the question needs to be asked in this day and age, why is that the case? And I suspect it is because that Tony Abbott is paying back many of those predominantly men who delivered the numbers for him against Malcolm Turnbull in the leadership ballot many, many years ago. Now, that's simply unacceptable in this day and age. It's not the way that we run, that shareholders would allow the CEO to run a major company, and it shouldn't be the way that we run our nation.
It's a bit rich for Labor to be having a go at rewarding number crunchers, please. After the last few years, that's a bit rich, isn't it?
Well, can I comment on that? I
Bill
think
Shorten's about to become leader.
I think your criticism is fair, Kieran. I'll say that your criticism is fair. But what's important is that we've recognised the errors of our ways. We've recognised that sort of system that's operated in the past is no longer acceptable and doesn't meet modern Australian views and aspirations. And we've reformed our system so that now 35,000 members of the Labor Party will have a say in who we believe should lead our party into the future.
All right.
In
That's
terms
a
of
good
the election of our front bench.
That's a good segue. Let's move on to it. I want to move on to that. I want to play you a bit of Anthony Albanese last night in Brisbane as he campaigns for the leadership with the rank and file of the Labor Party. Let's have a listen.
We should not be shy about defending the interests of Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and I am in a position to do both because I was loyal to both.
So, there you go. A bit of a subtle dig there at Bill Shorten, Matt?
No, I don't believe so. Look, Kieran, at the end of the day, I really think in this leadership ballot, what's going to matter to the members of the Labor Party is who can enunciate the better policy vision, who the members believe is better placed to be able to take an argument up to the new government, to hold them to account and to lead our party into the future. If you ask people, I do regular surveys of members of my branches. Well,
in your view?
In my view, I've encouraged Bill Shorten to run. I've worked closely with Bill over recent years in the Parliament, particularly on superannuation reform, and I think it's widely accepted amongst the superannuation industry that the reforms that Bill brought in demonstrate a vision for where our nation should head on retirement savings. And I've got to say, I've got a relative who's got a son with a profound intellectual disability. They were involved in negotiating with Bill Shorten regarding the architecture of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and they were glowing in their praise of the approach that Bill took in his consultation, in his work through the Productivity Commission, and in putting this scheme together. Bill did that lead-up groundwork, and I think in that context, Bill's got that policy vision and the ability to lead our nation into our nation and our party into the future.
Okay, Matt. Finally, Kelly O'Dwyer, I want to ask you about same-sex marriage. The ACT government is going to introduce legislation today that will legalise same-sex marriage, that couples will be able to get married by the end of the year. Do you think that this might be the catalyst for a change of heart within the coalition party, where Mr Abbott has said that he is open to, to have this policy decided by the new party room when it meets here at Parliament House next time the Parliament sits? What do you think on it?
Well, look, Kieran, I haven't seen the legislation, so I'm not in a position to make any commentary on it. But I will say this, we have set out a very clear agenda. Tony Abbott has articulated as Prime Minister the first things that we will do in government. We have already drawn up the orders for the legislation to get rid of the carbon tax. Operation Sovereign Borders is something that is now in place. We have got a very clear agenda and a clear mandate from the Australian people to implement that agenda, and that's what we're doing.
We're out of time. Kelly O'Dwyer, Matt Thistlethwaite, good to see you both. Thanks.
Pleasure, Kieran.
Pleasure.
A quick break.